Hi, I'm Marlene. 2 days after closing a $46 million deal, my family threw a party. Not for me, against me. In front of everyone, my sister stood up and screamed, "You're useless! You're broke!" My mother called me a parasite. My father clapped as I walked out. They didn't just humiliate me, they tried to erase me from my own legacy. But what none of them knew was that my name was already on the contract, and the moment my sister saw it, she fell to her knees. Now ask yourself, how far would your own blood go to claim what was never theirs? I arrived at the celebration straight from work, still in the same slate gray suit I had worn through 10 hours of negotiations. Traffic had been brutal, my head was still buzzing with numbers and signatures, but I kept telling myself this night might finally be different. Maybe this deal would change the way they saw me. Maybe, just this once, I would walk into a room and feel like I belonged there. The event hall was already full when I stepped inside. Soft music floated through the space, glasses chimed, people laughed in tidy circles. I paused near the entrance, scanning for a familiar face. No one looked up. A woman brushing past me asked, "Are you here for the celebration too?" As if I were a stranger off the street. I nodded, unsure what else to say. At the check-in table, a young helper handed me a small metal name pin. I glanced down, then froze for half a second. It read, Marla, not Marlene. One missing letter. A small mistake, maybe. Still, it stung more than it should have. I almost corrected her, then decided it was not worth the effort. I pinned it on anyway. Across the room, my sister Cressida stood at the center of a tight crowd. She looked radiant in a cream-colored dress, laughing easily as people leaned in to hear her. My parents hovered nearby, beaming. I waited for someone to wave me over. No one did. I made my way to the refreshment table, poured a glass of water, and took a quiet breath. This was silly, I told myself. The night was young, people would notice. They did, just not the way I hoped. Relatives brushed past me on their way to Cressida, clapping her on the back, praising her ambition, her drive. I caught fragments of conversation drifting through the air. She's always had a head for money. She keeps the whole family steady. She's the reason they're all doing so well. My father finally lifted his glass for a toast. The room hushed. "To Cressida," he said proudly, his voice ringing through the hall. "The one who keeps this family afloat." Applause burst out. Loud, enthusiastic. People folded toward her with admiration. She smiled, just a little too widely, soaking it in. No one mentioned the deal. Not the months of work, not the sleepless nights, not the final call that had closed at $46 million that very morning. I stood there with my wrong name pinned to my chest and felt myself quietly disappear. Dinner passed in a blur. At one point, my mother brought out a set of glossy folders labeled Family Financial Summary. She flipped through them with practiced ease, pointing out properties, investments, long-term plans. Each time, she credited Cressida with management and oversight. A neighbor leaned toward me with a warm smile. "Your sister really carries everyone, doesn't she?" The house I alone paid for was listed as supported by Cressida. My throat tightened. I forced a polite nod, afraid my voice would betray me. Later, when I gently corrected one detail, saying I had handled part of the down payment myself, Cressida turned on me with a sharp laugh. "You," she said loudly. "You can barely take care of yourself. Don't start making things up." The tables around us went quiet. A few people coughed. Someone dropped a fork. My parents stared at me as if I had ruined the evening's performance. My father leaned closer and muttered a word I had not heard him use before. "Parasite." It slipped out softly. Still, it landed like a blow. Cressida seized my wrist and pulled me toward the exit. Her grip was firm, almost impatient. "You're useless and broke," she hissed under her breath. "Leave before you embarrass us again." No one followed. No one stopped her. A couple of guests even let out awkward little laughs, unsure whether they were supposed to witness what was happening. Outside, the Texas night felt cold against my skin. Wind cut through the thin fabric of my suit. I stood there for a moment, steadying my breath, then walked to my car alone. As I sat behind the wheel, the lights of the hall blurred through the windshield. Music drifted faintly from inside. Celebration still going on without me. And that was when I realized something inside me had just quietly broken. I didn't cry. I just sat there behind the wheel, staring through the windshield like I was watching someone else's life unfold. The celebration behind me had turned into background noise. Laughter, music, the soft hum of a world that never invited me in. The kind of world they pretended was built without me. And maybe it had been. The word parasite echoed like a chant in my head. Parasite. That's what he said. I rested my head against the steering wheel, closing my eyes for a moment. A sharp breeze slipped in through the crack in the window, brushing across my skin like ice. I could have left the moment they looked past me, but I stayed, hoping. Maybe tonight they'd see me. Maybe the deal would matter more than the drama. But they never intended to see me. Not really. Eventually, I started the engine. The name pin lay on the passenger seat, still catching glints of light. Marla, it said. The wrong name for a person they never tried to know. I didn't throw it out. I just let it sit there like a mirror that wouldn't stop telling the truth. The roads were nearly empty as I drove through the quiet neighborhoods, each red light giving me too much time to think. Street lamps stretched long shadows across the pavement, and I felt smaller with every mile. I wasn't just leaving a party. I was being shut out of their version of the story, edited out like a mistake in a photo. When I finally pulled into my parking spot outside my apartment complex in North Dallas, the clock on the dash read 12:48 a.m. Everything felt colder than usual. I stepped out, shut the door gently, and stood still for a moment. Not because I needed air, but because I wasn't ready to walk into another kind of silence. Inside, the apartment was exactly how I left it. Tidy, quiet, humming softly with the fridge's motor and the dim kitchen light I always forgot to turn off. I dropped my keys in the dish by the door and kicked off my heels. The weight of the night settled into my bones as I leaned against the kitchen counter, eyes locked on nothing. No one was going to call to check on me. No one ever did. The screen of my phone lit up. A voicemail from Mom. I tapped play, already bracing myself. "You embarrassed us tonight." Her voice snapped through the speaker like she'd been rehearsing. Cressida is the one people look up to. She knows how to handle herself. Stop trying to compete. It's not a good look. There was no apology. No, "Are you okay?" Just the same message wrapped in a new coat of shame. I didn't delete it. I saved it. A soft knock on my door made me stiffen. When I opened it, Mrs. Alcott stood there with her hands wrapped around a mug. Her hair was in curlers, and she looked at me with that gentle sort of pity that people think is kindness. "I saw you come in," she said softly. "I figured you might want some tea." I nodded, though I didn't know what to say. She handed me the mug, then hesitated before speaking again. "Your sister? She must be exhausted carrying the family like that," she said, without any edge, just matter of fact. I smiled, or something close to it. "Yeah," I murmured, "must be." When she left, I stood in my doorway a little too long, letting the night air hold me still. Back inside, I placed the tea on the table and didn't touch it. Another voicemail. This one from Cressida. Her voice was different, sharper, colder. "You need to stop creating drama," she said. "You're unstable, Marlon. You always have been. You make everything messy. I've been the one holding things together, cleaning up your mistakes. You should be thanking me. You wouldn't survive without me." There was a pause. "You think closing one deal means something? You're not reliable. You're not stable. That's why no one trusts you with anything that matters." I listened to it twice. She really believed that, or she wanted to. She wanted to believe that erasing me was a kind of favor, that pushing me out was mercy. But for the first time in a long time, something didn't curl inward in me. Something stood up. I sat there in the dim light of my kitchen, looking around my modest little apartment, the one no one visited, the one they all pretended didn't exist. I let the silence stretch, let every word sink in, and I didn't cry. I thought about that name pin. I walked to the counter, picked it up, and turned it in my hand. Marla. Wrong name, wrong story, wrong version of me. I opened the drawer where I kept my old receipts and stuck the pin inside. I didn't throw it out. I knew I would need to remember it. Not because it mattered now, but because someday it would. I powered on my laptop, the screen lighting up in the quiet. The contract I signed that morning was still open. $46 million in clean lines and binding pages. My name, Marlon Hale, was printed on every sheet, every signature. Not Marla, not invisible. I read through it line by line, not because I needed to, just because I wanted to see it again. As I stared at my signature on that contract, a quiet truth finally settled in my bones. My family had no idea who they were pushing out. The glow of my signature on that digital contract had faded by morning, but the weight of it stayed with me. I moved slowly around my apartment, like every step was heavier than usual. My body wasn't sore from anything physical. It was the kind of weight you carry when you've been holding your breath too long, hoping someone would notice you were still in the room. I didn't cry last night, not because I was strong, but because something inside me had folded in on itself. And today, it just stayed there, folded, quiet, still. I brewed coffee on autopilot, the smell filling the space, pretending to comfort. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the steam rising from the mug, wondering if I imagined how cruel it had all been. Maybe I read too much into it. Maybe the word parasite had slipped out in frustration. Maybe they didn't mean to erase me. But then it hit me. Not a memory. I wish it had been that gentle. It was more like a slap I'd been ignoring for years. Last fall, a random Tuesday. I had dropped by my parents' house after work. No reason, really. Just one of those days when you think, I should stop in, say hi, remind them I exist. They were rearranging the photo wall in the living room. I still remember the sunlight hitting the wood floors, dust particles dancing in the air. Cressida was laughing with my mom about which frames looked best where. Dad was sitting in his recliner, nodding along like he was the king approving a royal gallery. At first, I didn't notice. I smiled at a new frame of Cressida at her promotion ceremony. Another of her shaking hands with the pastor at church. Cressida holding the neighbor's baby. Cressida at last year's Christmas party. There was even one of her on stage at a corporate gala, a night I had stayed up helping her write the speech for. Then it struck me. There wasn't a single picture of me. Not one. Not even an old one from when I had braces and wore overalls in every photo. Nothing. I'd lived in that house for 18 years. I'd played piano in that corner every Sunday. I had put up the very first version of that photo wall for my mom on her birthday. But now, I was gone. "Hey," I'd said, light, careful, trying to keep my voice breezy. "Where'd the one of me in the blue dress go? The Thanksgiving picture?" My mom glanced over without missing a beat. "Oh, sweetheart, we didn't have any good ones of you that matched the new color scheme." It wasn't even cruel. It was casual. Like I didn't photograph well. Like my face didn't belong in their version of the story. Like cleaning the wall meant cleaning me out of the frame. I remember laughing, shrugging, pretending it was fine. But something about the way my dad didn't even look up from the TV that day stuck with me. As if I hadn't spoken. As if I wasn't there. That memory cracked wide open now, flooding back as I sat at the same kitchen table in my own apartment, far from their walls, their stories, their rooms. And it hit me. Last night wasn't an accident. It was just the loudest example of something that had been happening for years. They didn't just forget me. They erased me. They erased me from pictures. They erased me from credit. They erased me from the version of the family they wanted to present to the world. And now they were trying to erase me from my own victory. From a deal that had my name on it, inked, sealed, impossible to undo. I reached for the folder again, reopening the contract files on my laptop. Marlene Hale, my name was everywhere, under every term, on every signature line, not a placeholder, not a footnote. For the first time, I didn't feel like I had to fight to be real. I didn't feel rage, not the way you'd expect. No yelling, no smashing things, just clarity, cold and clean. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from my parents. "We expect you to apologize to Cressida today. She's devastated after your behavior. Make it right." No greeting, no question, no room for how I might feel. I read it twice, then again. I almost laughed, but instead I sat still, letting the message echo in my chest. They weren't asking me to apologize, they were ordering it. Because that's how it always was. Keep the peace. Don't rock the boat. Let Cressida shine. Let Marlene shrink. But something had changed now. They were used to a daughter who stayed quiet, who took the blame, softened the truth, lowered her voice. I wasn't going to be that daughter anymore. I wasn't going to shrink around them. I wasn't going to apologize for refusing to disappear. And as their message glowed on my screen, I finally understood. They weren't afraid of losing me. They were afraid of losing control. I stared at the screen, at the message from my parents, still glowing in that familiar cold tone. And without overthinking it, I typed back, "I won't apologize for something I didn't do." I hit send before doubt had a chance to find its way in. No extra words, no softened edges. For once, I wasn't cushioning the truth with explanations or trying to make anyone feel better. It was just my boundary, the first one I'd ever drawn with them. The reply came almost immediately. "You're being dramatic. Stop this nonsense and come over." There it was, the usual dismissal, the tone that always used to level me, flatten me down to something manageable, containable. But this time, all it did was confirm what I already knew. I was never the problem. They just didn't like me having a voice. I set the phone down and leaned back on the couch, letting the quiet wrap around me like armor. It wasn't silence out of sadness. It was space. Space to think, space to breathe. And in that stillness, a different kind of memory floated in. I was 12. It was a hot summer afternoon, and Cressida had locked herself in her room, crying because her friend hadn't invited her to a sleepover. My mom had been frantic, pacing the hallway like someone had died. My dad stood at the bottom of the stairs, barking, "Fix it, Marlene. Go talk to her. Get her to calm down." So I did. I sat outside her door for an hour, talking through it, making jokes, telling stories until she finally opened it. And when she did, I hugged her, even though she didn't say thank you. Later that night, Mom handed Cressida a bowl of ice cream and said, "You're our sensitive one. You carry the family's heart." I remember standing right there in the doorway thinking, but I'm the one who did the carrying. That wasn't the only time. There were errands, forgotten birthdays, tension between relatives. Whenever something hard needed doing, it was handed to me. Quietly, automatically. like an invisible job no one wanted to admit existed. But when it came time for the spotlight, the praise, the credit, that always had Cressida's name on it. She was the image, I was the support beam, and no one claps for support beams. Just as I was turning that thought over in my head, my phone buzzed again. I expected another jab from my parents, maybe even Cressida herself. But the screen showed an unfamiliar Dallas area number. I answered cautiously. "Hello? Good afternoon. I'm calling for Ms. Cressida Hale regarding a property ownership inquiry." I blinked. "This is her sister. I think you have the wrong number." A pause on the other end, paper rustling. "Oh, we were told this was the contact number listed for the property owner of 4830 Sycamore Drive." My heartbeat stuttered. That address. That was my parents' house. "I'm sorry," I said slowly. "Can you clarify who you're trying to reach?" Another pause. "Our records indicate the house is under Marlene Hale. That's you, correct?" I sat up straighter. "Yes, that's me." "Perfect. We're just following up on some documents filed last quarter. There was a discrepancy in listed contact information." I answered his questions mechanically, every word a beat against the shock pressing on my chest. After the call ended, I stayed frozen. It was mine, the house, the one they constantly said Cressida kept afloat, the one they told everyone she managed. I was the legal owner, not her. I paid the mortgage, I signed the papers, I dealt with the termites, the plumbing, the insurance mix-ups. And yet, they'd let everyone believe she was the one responsible. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate, crafted, repeated until it became their truth. I closed my eyes. I could hear my mom's voice now from just 2 nights ago. "We're so proud of all Cressida's done for this family." I'd stood there, wine glass in hand, smiling through the sting, pretending it didn't hurt, pretending that kind of erasure didn't matter. But it did. I got up, grabbed my laptop, and opened the family group chat, something I usually avoided unless it involved emergencies. I scrolled back through years of messages, reminders from me about utility bills, updates on property taxes, photos of receipts I'd submitted for things I fixed around the house. Each one followed by a response that praised Cressida for keeping everything together. I wasn't imagining it. The imbalance wasn't subtle. It was structured, maintained. My gaze fell on the drawer by the couch. I pulled it open and took out the metal name pin from the party. Marla. I set it down beside the printed transcription of the voicemail from the bank, now flagged and saved. 2 versions of me. The one they called clumsy, unstable, forgettable, and the one in legal records, financial systems, real estate contracts. The one they needed, but refused to acknowledge. I traced my fingers over the edge of the pin, then whispered out loud, "They're not going to like who I become next." And before I could think twice, I did something none of them ever expected. I printed the documents, the mortgage statements, the deed, the wire receipts, everything with my name. I slid them into a folder, got in my car, and drove. The sun was still hanging in the sky, low but strong, casting a soft orange over the streets I'd known my whole life. The route to my parents' house hadn't changed. Every stop sign, every mailbox, every patch of sidewalk, I knew it all. But today, the familiarity felt thin, like I was walking back into a play I'd been written out of. I parked at the curb, just past the driveway where I learned to ride a bike. The front yard looked the same porch swing, same faded "Welcome Friends" sign. But stepping onto it now felt like stepping into someone else's memory. Inside, the air was stiff, not hostile, not welcoming, just careful. My dad sat in his recliner, arms crossed, as if already bracing for me. Mom was perched on the edge of the couch, her hands neatly folded. Cressida stood near the fireplace like she owned the room. There was a faint smile on her face, a knowing one. "I'm not here to argue," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I just want to make something clear." My mother sighed. "I got a call today," I began, "from the bank, about this house." Dad shifted. Cressida raised an eyebrow. "They confirmed the deed, the mortgage, the payments, are all in my name." I opened the folder and laid out the papers on the coffee table, carefully like evidence. Every document, every line, it's all me. Dad scoffed. "Not this again." I looked at him. "Again?" "We know what Cressida does for us," he said flatly. "You're always looking for a way to insert yourself." Mom didn't even glance at the pages. "You helped when you could, Marlon, but let's not pretend you kept us going." I nodded slowly. "Okay." Then I reached for the second set of papers. "This is from last spring, when you had that emergency surgery. You remember?" Mom blinked. "Of course. I wired you $18,000, directly, from my savings." They both stared. Cressida leaned in. "You did?" I kept my eyes on my mother. "I was told you thought that money came from Cressida." Mom tilted her head. "Didn't it?" "I sent it." She paused, confused. "But Cressida said she helped us. She said she transferred the money from her account." Cressida's voice was light, dismissive. "Maybe the bank just got things mixed up. You know how those systems are?" "No," I said. "They didn't." I placed the receipt down, right beside the first folder. My name again. My account. My signature. I looked at my sister. "You let them believe that." She smiled like it was beneath her. "What difference does it make? They got what they needed." My hands trembled slightly, but I kept them flat on my lap. "It makes a difference to me." Dad stood up. "You've always had this habit of making everything about you." I turned to him. "This isn't about attention. It's about truth. No, it's about you needing to be the victim, again." Then came the word, casual, cutting. "Grow up, Marla." He said it slowly, deliberately. The same wrong name that had been stamped on that pin. The same name that had followed me around like a shadow not worth fixing. My throat tightened, not from sadness, but from the quiet crack of something inside. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. I sat a moment longer, let the silence settle around the room like dust. Then I said, "Can you name one thing I've done for this family that mattered to you?" They were quiet. I waited. Still nothing. Not even the decency to lie. Not even a fake compliment or a soft pat on the back to smooth the edges. Cressida looked at her nails. Dad sighed like he was bored. Mom shifted in her seat, like she was late for something. My body felt suddenly weightless, like I could float away from this house and never be missed. I stood up. They didn't ask where I was going. They didn't stop me. And maybe that's what hurt the most. I walked out, down the steps, across the same patch of lawn where I'd once danced in the sprinklers, past the hydrangea bush I'd planted with Mom when I was 9, toward the car I bought with my own money, with no help, no cosigner, no applause. And as I reached my car, something stopped me, something that changed everything. It was my father's voice, echoing across the yard, louder than he needed to be, like he wanted the whole street to hear. "We're just so proud of Cressida," he said, smiling toward Mrs. Kinney, watering her porch plants next door. "She just bought her first home, you know. Does everything for this family." I turned, just enough to see them. My father beaming, Cressida standing beside him like she was on a podium, her arms crossed, her grin, quiet and cruel. She saw me hear it. She wanted me to. That house. My house. She wasn't just taking credit. She was planting stories, spreading her version so wide and bold it would bury mine entirely. I stood there for a moment, the keys in my hand, heart knocking against my ribs. I could have yelled. I could have marched back up those steps and held up every document like a courtroom witness. But instead, I sat in my car and shut the door. The silence wrapped around me like an old coat. I stared out at the lawn where I'd once picked dandelions as a kid and made wishes that never came true. My eyes dropped to the passenger seat, where that damned Marla pin still sat crooked and shining in the light. They weren't just getting my name wrong, they were erasing me altogether. I tightened my grip on the wheel, my breath leveled, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small. I felt focused. Instead of heading home, I turned left at the light and made my way downtown. The streets were quiet. It was early Saturday evening, and most people were out to dinner or at home unwinding. But my office tower still stood tall, glowing faintly in the lowering sun. I parked in the garage, rode the elevator up with the hum of fluorescent lights, and stepped into the stillness of the suite where I'd worked longer hours than anyone cared to notice. No reception, no movement. Just the quiet of marble floors and locked offices. I unlocked the door to the archive room and flipped on the light. There they were, rows of binders, meticulously labeled. I moved to the one I needed, Family Financial Compliance, Internal Records. I pulled it down and sat at the small conference table, flipping pages until I found what I was looking for. 3 weeks ago, our family was required to complete insurance renewal forms for the property and personal coverage, part of the ongoing requirements tied to my business acquisition. Cressida had volunteered to handle it. But the forms, blank, no signatures, no dates, no submissions. She hadn't lifted a finger. Not only had she lied to our parents, she'd let the process lapse, and the only reason it didn't explode was because I stepped in at the last minute and filed everything under emergency compliance. She hadn't even known. And still, somehow, she was being toasted on front lawns and given credit for holding the family together. I sat back and stared at the 2 stacks of paperwork. Hers, empty. Mine, filed, signed, documented, backed up, twice. There weren't 2 versions of the truth. There were 2 daughters, one who pretended and one who executed. I opened my laptop and began scanning. Every receipt, every mortgage installment, every email with the insurance adjuster. I organized it all into a digital folder, not to share, not yet, but to protect myself, to make sure that when the time came, and I had a sinking feeling it was coming, I wouldn't be caught unprepared. I was done reacting. I was preparing. I was tired of defending things I'd already built with my own hands. As the files uploaded to the cloud, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I hesitated, then picked up. "Hi, is this Ms. Marlon Hale?" "Yes," I replied cautiously. "This is Jennifer Dawson from the Dallas Community Heritage Board. Congratulations! We're thrilled Cressida reached out to us about the family legacy ceremony next week." I blinked. "Excuse me?" "She told us the house would be transferred to her name before the event, and that you had already approved it. We just need a signature from you to finalize the listing in our program as Cressida Hale Family Estate. It's such a beautiful story." My mouth went dry. She wasn't just stealing credit, she was rewriting the legal narrative, attempting to make herself the Hale daughter on record. Publicly, permanently. I swallowed hard. "There's been a mistake." "Oh?" Jennifer's tone shifted slightly. "Cressida said you were aligned and just hadn't had a chance to send the final form." "No," I said firmly. "I never agreed to transfer the house, and I certainly didn't approve any legacy event." Silence. "I'll need to speak with your board directly," I added. "Please send me everything Cressida submitted, every document, every quote." "Of course," Jennifer said slowly. "We'll get that over to you right away." I hung up, hands cold, heart thudding. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't about attention or praise anymore. This was strategy. This was erasure in motion. I sat in the quiet of that office, surrounded by facts, files, dates, and signatures. Surrounded by truth. I ended the call slowly, realizing my sister wasn't just trying to overshadow me, she was trying to replace me. The office felt colder after that. The lights above my desk hummed softly, the only sound in the room. I sat there for a long minute, phone resting in my palm, replaying the woman's words from the community board. Transfer the house, family legacy, my approval. Cressida hadn't asked, she'd announced it. That wasn't confidence. That was a land grab. I didn't rush home. I stayed where the truth lived. Inside my files, inside timestamps, inside signatures that didn't lie. I backed up everything again, twice, into folders only I could access. Not because I was afraid, but because I was finally thinking like someone who understood the stakes. By the time the sun rose the next morning, my inbox was already waiting for me. A message from a colleague I trusted. "Hey, Marlene, just checking in. I heard you're stepping back from work for a while. Are you okay?" My chest tightened. I hadn't told anyone I was stepping back. I hadn't even left my desk early. I replied right away. "That's not true." "Who said that?" His response came fast. He forwarded the message. It was from Cressida's private account. "Marlene has been having emotional issues and isn't stable enough for high-level matters right now," she wrote. "Please send urgent business through me or our parents until further notice." My vision blurred, not with tears, but with disbelief. She wasn't just after my property anymore. She was after my name. My phone rang less than 10 minutes later. Human Resources. "Ms. Hale," the woman said carefully, "we received an anonymous report claiming you misrepresented your authority during the $46 million deal." My stomach dropped. That accusation could end everything. I took a breath, steadier than I felt. "I can clear that up right now." I sent them the contracts, the approval chain, the timestamps, every layer of proof. There was a long pause on the line. "Thank you," she said finally. "We see no wrongdoing, but someone clearly tried to undermine your credibility." Undermine. That word felt older than this moment. Older than the deal. Older than my career. It felt like my childhood. I left the office just after noon and drove straight to my parents' house. No shaking this time, no speeches rehearsed in my head, just facts. They were all there. My parents sat stiffly on the couch. Cressida leaned against the counter like none of this touched her. I placed my phone on the table and slid it toward them. "Read," I said. They scrolled. The smear message, the HR report, the note from the community board. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father went silent. Cressida laughed lightly. "You're really stretching with this, Marlene." I tapped the screen and played the voicemail. Her voice, clear as day, talking about transferring my house. The room shifted. This time, it wasn't me defending myself. It was their lies standing naked in the open. "I will not let you erase me," I said quietly. For the first time in my adult life, my father didn't interrupt. He sat back down. No one argued. No one apologized. But the balance of the room had changed. As I turned to leave, my phone buzzed again. This time, the message came from the Dallas boardroom. "There is a discrepancy regarding signing authority on the contract. All parties must be present tomorrow morning." All parties, including Cressida, which meant she had already tried something bigger than gossip. She had reached for the deal itself. And in that moment, I understood. Tomorrow wouldn't just be a meeting, it would be the battlefield. I arrived at the tower before most of the lights were even on. The city outside the glass walls was still shaking off the weekend. I chose a muted charcoal suit on purpose, not to impress, to disappear into focus. When the doors opened to the executive floor, The air felt sharper, colder, like the building itself knew what was coming. The boardroom sat at the far end of the hall. Long table, polished surface, glass walls that made everything feel exposed. One by one, the executives filtered in. No casual chatter, no easy smiles. Everyone sensed a storm. Then the elevator chimed again. Cressida stepped out between my parents. She paused when she saw me. A flicker crossed her face before she rebuilt that familiar confidence, like a mask snapping back into place. I didn't look at her. I took my seat and opened my folder. The senior executive cleared his throat. We've identified conflicting communications regarding authority and representation tied to the $46 million contract. Emails appeared on the screen. Some were mine, clean, verified. Others were twisted versions. Same tone, same phrasing, different sender logs. Anonymous but not convincing. My pulse stayed steady. I slid my folder forward. "Those are the originals," I said, "with server verification." They leaned in. The room shifted from accusation to examination. Then the contract appeared, 2 versions side by side. Mine, clean and authenticated. Hers, altered. Her name layered beside mine, the digital pressure uneven, the ink pattern wrong. The consultant spoke without emotion. "This signature was inserted. It is not valid." The silence that followed had weight. Cressida's color drained fast. My mother's breath caught. My father looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. The executive turned to her. "Ms. Hale, who authorized you to submit this document?" She opened her mouth once. Nothing came out. Tried again. Her voice fractured. I was only trying to help the family." That sentence landed like a confession. I stood. "For years, I allowed my family to define me," I said, my voice calm enough to sting. "But facts don't bend to comfort, and effort can't be forged." I placed the original contract on the table. "This deal is mine, and it always was." No one argued. Then I added softly, "I'll leave any legal follow-up to the board." It wasn't mercy. It was confidence. The decisions came fast. Cressida was barred from any contact related to the company. A formal investigation was opened. All communications would now run through me alone. My parents tried to speak, stumbled through excuses that no longer landed. The room had already moved past them. As the executives filed out, the weight finally collapsed onto Cressida. She dropped to her knees beside the table, voice breaking. "Please, don't let them press charges. I didn't think it would go this far." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't step closer. "Actions grow legs," I said quietly, "and they always walk somewhere." Then I turned and left. As the elevator doors closed behind me, the question I'd avoided all my life finally surfaced. What do I owe a family that never saw me? The question settled in my chest, like something old and familiar, but now it didn't ache. It just existed, like a scar I had finally stopped picking at. I stepped out of the corporate tower into the thick Dallas afternoon. The sun had climbed to its peak, pressing down on the sidewalks, heating the metal of parked cars. But inside me, there was a strange calm. Not joy, not relief, just stillness. Like the silence after a storm when even the air feels too tired to move. Driving home, I didn't rush. I kept the windows up, the AC humming softly, the city rolling past me in pieces. My mind was quiet, not spinning or second-guessing. For once, I wasn't trying to rewrite the past. I was just letting it land. Everything that happened, the lies, the forged papers, the silence in that boardroom when truth finally drowned the noise, I held it and let it go at the same time. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back wasn't the same one they tried to silence at the kitchen table or blame when things went wrong. She was older, yes, tired, but she was standing. That mattered. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my phone had started vibrating, repeated calls, voicemails. I left my keys in the ignition and listened. My mother's voice, soft, shaky, like she was trying to rewind a tape she'd just realized she'd been recording wrong. My father, measured, rehearsed, like a man still trying to manage optics, even inside his own family. And Cressida, crying. Her words weren't apologies. They were fear. Fear of what would happen next. Fear of the fallout. I didn't return a single call. Not because I wanted revenge, because for the first time, I knew their panic didn't belong to me. It wasn't mine to carry. I stepped inside and dropped my bag on the floor. The house was still, quiet in the way that makes you hear your own breathing. I walked to the kitchen, opened the drawer near the sink without thinking, and there it was, that folded napkin. The same one they'd handed me when they asked me to leave the party. It had sat there for weeks. I didn't know why I'd kept it. Maybe because I wanted to remember. Or maybe because part of me hoped one day it would mean something different. I unfolded it on the table, smoothed the creases with my palm. At the time, it had been a wound, a humiliation wrapped in linen. Now, it was proof. Proof that I endured, that I didn't break where I could have, that I didn't stay small just because they needed me to be. Later, I met David, my old mentor, at a small cafe tucked between a florist and a bookstore. He didn't ask questions when I walked in. He just nodded at the booth and slid a cup of coffee across the table toward me. "They saw what you did," he said after a few quiet minutes. "The board. They saw how you carried that deal." I stayed silent, not because I doubted him, but because I wasn't used to being seen like that. He leaned forward. "You didn't just win today, Marlene. You corrected the record. That takes more strength than most people ever find." The words hit deeper than I expected. Not because they were loud, but because they were true. Back home, just after sundown, another call came through. The board again. They informed me that formal proceedings had begun. Cressida would likely face penalties, legal ones. I didn't flinch. I didn't cheer either. This wasn't about punishment. It was about truth. They tried to make a story without me. I just wrote myself back in. Around 7:30, I got back in my car and drove to my parents' house. I didn't go to reconcile. I went to end it. The porch light was already on when I pulled up, like they were waiting. They opened the door fast, like they were afraid I'd change my mind. My mother looked tired. Her hands shook as she reached out. My father stood behind her, quiet for once. Cressida was there too, eyes red, face pale. No one said anything at first. Then my father started talking, trying to frame things, trying to explain the unexplainable. My mother chimed in with soft whimpers about not meaning harm. Cressida didn't speak. I let them finish. Then I said one thing. I'm done carrying what isn't mine. That was it. No monologue. No list of all the ways they'd failed me. Just a line, a boundary, a truth. Their faces changed, not because I'd lashed out, but because I hadn't. For once, they couldn't accuse me of overreacting. I wasn't angry. I wasn't crying. I was done. I reached into my bag and pulled out the napkin. The same one. I placed it gently on the entry table beside the lamp. Let it sit there like a quiet punctuation mark at the end of a long, messy chapter. Then I turned and walked out. The night air was cooler now, still. There was no applause, no music, just the soft click of the door behind me and the sound of my own footsteps returning to something that finally felt like peace. And as I walked away, I realized freedom doesn't always come from winning. Sometimes it comes from refusing to keep losing,